Lost Vessels of the Challenger Deep, written by Greg Sweetapple. It was midday when Dr. Tegan Mayrick descended into the ocean in her submersible, but the comforting warmth of the sunlight had given way to pure, impenetrable darkness about 100 fathoms back, and the immediate environment was blacker than the darkest night. There was little to be seen from the tiny vessel's reinforced viewport, as aside from the odd jellyfish or derelict school of small fish, this portion of the Pacific Ocean was nearly devoid of life. The only thing connecting Tegan to the rest of humanity was a radio link to the surface. A lifeline to familiar and friendly voices. She was part of the prestigious team of scientists, the Neptune Society of Underwater Archaeology, or NSUA for short, who had become renowned the world over for the contributions to deep-sea diving technology, primarily with the Poseidon 001 deep-sea diving suit, as well as for the intensive exploration of famous shipwrecks such as the Titanic and the Edmund Fitzgerald. In more recent years, the organization began development of new submarine technology in order to allow exploration of the deepest known point of Earth's oceans, the Challenger Deep. The result of the development was a tiny red vessel dubbed the Tiamat, after an ancient Mesopotamian deity of salt water. With a shell almost 4 feet thick of solid titanium and powerful jets attached to both the underside and the rear of the device, the Tiamat would almost certainly be able to withstand the immense water pressure deep in the Mariana Trench. The only thing that remained was to pick a pilot for the sub's maiden voyage into the Challenger Deep, a person who would be the first to see the deepest point of the Earth's oceans with their own eyes, with extensive training and field experience in the use of numerous submarine models. Dr. Mayrick was the perfect choice. With a final wave of the hand from Captain Patterson of the NSUA flagship Armstrong, the Tiamat was then lowered into the waters off the coast of Guam with Tegan inside it, prepared for the greatest mission in the history of underwater exploration. The descent was painfully slow, with hours passing as the rays of sunlight from the surface began to thin out more and more until the only lights surrounding the Tiamat came from the submersible itself. Tegan transferred her hands from the control sticks of the vessel to the light control joystick situated in the right corner of the massive control panel. Maneuvering the external floodlights was simple, but became useless as they could only illuminate 30 feet in front of the device. After 30 feet, what was left of the light was engulfed in the thickening darkness. After what felt like hours passed, the doctor finally came upon the ocean floor. It consisted mostly of fine silt and the occasional scattered stone, with only a few bottom-feeding fish and stranded shellfish present as signs of life. A strange feeling overcame her as she activated the vehicle's GPS monitor and slowly propelled the craft forward en route to the gargantuan slopes of the Challenger Deep. She couldn't quite place it, but she felt as though this particular dive was going to be different from all the others. Within minutes, Tegan arrived at her destination. The silty seabed gave way to a colossal rock face that dropped off sharply into the oceanic abyss. Staring down into the magnitude of the enormous void before her gave the doctor clashing feelings of both unease and speechless wonder. She flicked a switch next to the radio on the control panel and in one short breath flatly stated, "I'm going in." She eased the submersible forward, leaving what little comfort remained with her on the bottom of the Pacific Ocean as she delved into the final frontier on planet Earth. Deeper and deeper she descended, keeping the cracking rock face of the trench within sight of the Tiamat's light all the while. Gazing upon the walls of the Mariana Trench conjured images within Tegan's mind of the movements that had borne such an immense gap in the very crust of the earth, millennia of shifting rock, massive volcanic eruptions, and the devastating pushing and grinding of lumbering tectonic plates had forged this section of the Pacific Ocean's floor into a seemingly bottomless pit. Suddenly, Tegan's thoughts were interrupted as the feeling from before overcame her once again, only this time it was much more pronounced. It was a creeping fear that worked its way from her tailbone all along her spine and to the base of her skull. The hairs on her arms began to stand up on end. It was a familiar feeling. The feeling of being watched. With no port windows to check behind the vessel, all Tegan could do was lean forward and stare through the forward viewport, squinting. In her peripheral vision, she thought herself to have caught a glimpse of some long, curving, tendril-like shape, moving itself just out of her view. She quickly leaned forward more, pressing her face up against the glass, in hopes of getting a better view, but alas, the shape was gone. She sat back into her chair and continued the descent. For the next several fathoms, Tegan contemplated what she had just seen, or indeed whether or not she had seen anything at all. Perhaps the apparition was merely her mind playing tricks on her, preying upon the natural fear of the unknown, and displaying visions that weren't truly there. Perhaps it had been a giant squid or a similar cephalopod. After all, those animals were known to occupy the deep waters of the world's oceans. And thus, this was not far out of the realm of possibility. Perhaps, though, it had been something else, something unknown. Tegan brushed aside these thoughts in an attempt to keep her mind focused more on the task at hand, the exploration of the Challenger Deep. Despite this, the fear remained at the back of her mind, gnawing at her psyche, no matter how hard she tried to forget it. Regardless, she continued her descent. It was then that Tegan began to notice a change in the rock face that she had been keeping such a close eye on during her whole journey downwards. The crackling grooves in the rock began to multiply the further down the sub traveled. The seemingly random cracks began to take on the appearance of veins, as if the rock face had become a colossal heap of flesh. Perhaps it had just been Tegan's mind, but to her, it even appeared as though the pseudo-veins were bleeding, oozing some mysterious substance that was denser than the water around it, and even looked to be moving on its own, caressing the veins with some form of adhesive dedication. Dr. Mayrick attempted to refocus her attention on the submarine, but found herself fixated upon the sights before her. Unable to avert her gaze, she stared in the mixture of wondrous awe and abject terror. Unsure of whether she was looking at some genuine happening, or if the depths of the ocean had finally began to erode her previously grounded psyche. Then, without warning, as soon as the veins of the bulbous muck had appeared, they evaporated right before her eyes, as if they retreated into the cliff face, or were sucked in by some unknowable force from within the rock. Tegan blinked, and the rock face was once again, as it had been previously, sprinkled with small sharp cracks and indents, none of which were oozing anything at all. An incomparable feeling of dread overcame the doctor. She reached for the submersible's control sticks in an attempt to escape from what she felt was imminent peril, but found herself paralyzed, frozen in fear of what lay beyond the viewport of her vessel. She felt cold, like the warmth of the machine in which she inhabited was being slowly drawn out into the surrounding waters, like the ocean itself was a vampire sucking the heat from her body. Frost encroached from the corners of the viewport, clouding Tegan's vision of the sea outside her tiny hovel. It was when the doctor caught her own breath in her sight, shaken and labored as it was, that she realized her mind was not playing tricks on her at all, and that whatever she was experiencing was real. Still traveling downwards, the sub continued its journey with its singular occupant unable to stop it. The cold pierced Tegan's body with relentless precision as she shivered uncontrollably. Her hands no longer resting on the control sticks as gravity dragged the Tiamat closer and closer to the bottom of the world. This is it, the doctor thought to herself. No more dives, no more underwater exploration. I'm not getting out of here. She felt her consciousness waver and she became dizzy. The cold was finally reaching its way to her brain and her heart. Soon she would be dead. Just as she was about to lose her grip on the will to live, the Tiamat came to a slow and calm rest on something. The jolt of the landing was strong enough to shock Tegan back to her senses, staving off death for a few more brief moments. The doctor slowly forced her hand to the light controls and moved the external floodlight downwards in order to see where she had landed. If I'm going to die down here, I might as well have a look at my grave, she thought. The power to the sub was fading, and the floodlight was merely flickering in the claustrophobic opacity. From the viewport, she saw where she had landed. The trough of the trench was covered in shipwrecks. It was as if the floor itself was made of metal, the abandoned corpses of long-forgotten trans-Pacific journeys. It made no sense to Tegan. Where had these ships come from? There were no records of any vessels being lost in this region of the ocean, not even in the hundreds of years that ships had been sailing here. Dr. Mayrick maneuvered the floodlights along the valley of iron carcasses and focused in on the walls of the trench. The rock face that had previously frightened Tegan half to death was now much more horrific in its appearance. Etched into the cliffside were hundreds of thousands of carvings. The drawings within the stone depicted great masses of tentacles, each covered in a multitude of hideous eyes. Feelers and antennae sprouted out in all directions, reaching for something unattainable. Gaping maws lined the rows of serrated teeth made their presence known along the engraved rock. It defied explanation. Nothing could have made such carvings this deep within the ocean. The pressure of the water at such leagues would crush any human. Thus, Tegan concluded, in her barely functional mind, these depictions were made by someone, or something else. The engravings clearly depicted some type of creature that was entirely unknown to mankind. Once again, the doctor felt her grip on life slipping away in the unexplained frigidity of the depths. Try as she might to maintain her grasp on consciousness, it proved to be futile. In her last moments, Dr. Mayrick felt the Tiamat move, or rather, it was the ground beneath the Tiamat that was moving instead of the submarine itself. She heard the creaking of ancient rusted metal being jarred loose from the old watery grave that held it all within its clutches. As the light faded from Tegan's eyes, she caught a glimpse of something outside of the viewport. A massive yellow sphere appeared from out of the darkness of the trench. Its size was incalculable, unfathomable to the human mind. Within the center of the sphere was a black horizontal figure-8 shape that seemed to stare directly into the tiny viewport of the Tiamat and directly into Tegan's eyes. The sphere dwarfed the Tiamat, which only appeared as a speck in the wake of the globe. It was then that Tegan realized, in her last thoughts, as the life was finally snuffed from her body, that what she had seen was an eye.